Hello everyone and welcome once again to God Talk on Cambridge Community Access Television. Each week we get together and we talk about God, we talk about life, we talk about faith, we talk about meaning, we talk about being. And as we do so often, as I do so often, I'm doing so with my friend Michael Koran, one of my best friends. And I thought today, I had a couple of ideas for a show today, but in the last moment, Michael convinced me to do something that I had tinkered with, an idea that I had tinkered with, which was to do a greatest hits, poems that have been most meaningful to me, poems by other people. And really what started it was a poem that we shared in the green room before coming on for the show, as we were talking about what we might do. And it's a war poem, and it was written by Wilfred Owen during World War I, and we think that he died before.
Oh, we did.
He was killed
Just before the end, that day.
Just before the end. Can't help but remember the words of Senator John Kerry when he had was first testifying before Congress about the Vietnam War and asking what kind of meaning, I can't remember the exact words, but how would it be to be the last person to die in a war, in a losing war? Something like that, right?
Yes.
It was at a time when the nation was largely convinced that the Vietnam War was hopeless. You might be interested to know that that in Vietnam, that war is referred to as the American War. Anyway, what got us started here was this poem by Wilfred Owen, written out of the First World War, and this was a favorite of my brother's. So my brother, if you are watching, this is for you. And the title of the poem is Dulce et Decorum Est, which is Latin. And we have a note here that the title and the last two lines are from Horace, the Roman poet and writer Horace, in his odes, quote, "Sweet and fitting it is to die for the fatherland." And so, very ironically, this poem has that in the title. Dulce et decorum est. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind. Drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of the tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling around, floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not say with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. I added the spit. And I should add for the benefit of our technician that I didn't actually spit, I was just making sounds. So, we seem to be on a, oh, before we leave that poem, thoughts. You had asked earlier what the tired, outstripped 5 9s were, and those were a cannon. Those were the cannons that fired shells into the trenches. I wish I had more facts at hand, like how many men died in the trenches, or I think it's still that there was a record set for tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of men being killed in a single day or something like that. I think there was a record set. Anyway, thoughts on that poem?
It was the beginning of what's grown to be anti-war sentiment. I mean, we talked in our first show of George Fox, which was very new, saying I wouldn't, moving toward not fighting wars. But even he didn't say that. He was the founder of the Quakers.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, I think, relatively new. People like him, Hemingway said in the Second World War, since we didn't learn that, all those big words like love of country, courage, patriotism, really mean what Wilfred Owen just described.
Mm.
Those big words mean broken arms, lost legs, crying people, young men as they die.
Battle fatigue, or what was the other expression for what is now called PTSD?
Maybe something with the word shock in it, I'm not sure.
Right,
Shell shock.
Shell shock, right. I think that the word shell shock was one of the things that came out of World War One, where men would come home, in a state of shock.
Well, that song that was adapted, where are your legs that used to run, hurroo,
Huh.
hurroo, where are your legs that used to run, hurroo, hurroo.
Where'd that come from, that song?
I think it's an earlier song that was changed. That was, I believe, World War One.
Right. When Johnny Comes Marching Home was the original, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Where are your legs that used to run? They've been lost from a gun. My darling dear, you look so queer. Johnny, my heart will you.
Well, it was in the in World War One that we really had mechanized warfare in a way that we never had before.
They used to tell the soldiers who were in the trenches, which was unbearable, and it was just the commanders would say charge, and they'd run over the trenches to get to a few yards, and the other side had machine guns, and would just mow them down. This was a new technology.
Yeah, and it was just back and forth for years.
Yeah, and there's a famous moment when it was Christmas, and they heard each other, the French and the Germans, singing Christmas carols. And they decided for that night to lay down their arms and celebrate together. Because they had nothing against each other. It was a war fought for nothing, really. changed the world.
Well, it was called the War to End All Wars
Yeah.
because it was called the Great War because it was assumed that that was going to be the last
Yes.
one.
Make the world safe for democracy.
And 20 years later, we're at it again.
Well, that war helped make the one 20 years.
Oh, I know,
Especially the settlement.
because Germany was so humiliated.
By the settlement too.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
made Germany pay
and so that it
for the war.
it was a breeding ground for people like Hitler.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So the poem eventually is beginning to make its way, only beginning. It looks like, when will they ever learn, you know, that song.
Mhm.
I mean, we've
Peter,
done,
Paul, and Mary, did they make it famous?
perhaps,
Uh,
where have all the flowers gone?
right.
But we've done Iraq, we've done Afghanistan.
Well, with every generation, we have a generation that doesn't know what war is except by what they've seen on, I don't know, movies or in videos.
Yes.
And for some young people, it's a rite of passage, and one, especially men, can't help but wonder, you know, if I were in that situation, what would I do? And some men feel called to be tested in that way, to see what they would do. And
Well, like many of our contemporaries, you were in the armed services.
yeah. I joined right at the close of the Vietnam War.
And voluntarily, right?
Yeah. Well, for a lot of different reasons. There was not just one reason, but the fact that I didn't have a job, couldn't find a job, was an incentive. So that was part of it. I mean, I was fresh out of high school with mediocre grades and jobless, and so the military had offered an answer.
Was it good for you?
It was very good, actually. I was not doing well. I was directionless. I was a mess. And it forced me, and in fact, during the year between high school and my joining the military, I developed a rash, which I think of now as psychosomatic. It was a rash that started on my hands, and I developed this habit of washing my hands in scalding hot water to relieve the itching. And so pretty soon my hands started cracking and bleeding, and the rash spread up my arms and then over my whole body. There was no inch of my body that was not covered with this itching rash, and I would tie my hands at night to keep from scratching. Tie my hands so I could sleep. It was a mess. And I was a mess. Anyways, so I happened to be walking by a recruiter's office one day, and I turned and walked in.
Wow!
Turned and walked in and just started talking to the Air Force recruiter. I'd always loved airplanes. I'd grown up making model airplanes, jet airplanes, and so the airplanes of World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War were kind of part of my personal mythology. And so in short order, I joined up. I mean, that night he gave me, was it that night or another time that I visited him? I took a test, I passed, he gave me a lift home. Meets my dad, they're shaking hands, my dad all proud to see that I might be joining the military, and I'm reading the pamphlets, the Air Force recruiter pamphlets, and I remember very distinctly one particular passage saying, trying to describe boot camp, what boot camp was going to be like, and it was saying, we won't scream at you, or we will trust your intelligence, and we will explain why it is that you need to do the things that you do. And so I thought, it's not like the boot camp that I saw in the movies about. I mean, it's going to be respectful, and they're going to honor my dignity, and so I was all psyched to go to boot camp. And I remember the first night of arriving in Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. There was a bus that took all the recruits from the civilian air base right outside of San Antonio. And we rode this bus to the Air Force Base, stopped in front of a hangar. This guy gets on, this sergeant gets on, and starts screaming at us. Screaming! Telling us what to do. Telling us how bad we were and how we had to get our act together. And I made a promise to myself in that instant that I was going to survive this boot camp. I was going to keep my head down, I was not going to be noticed, and I was going to get through this. And you got to remember that, I still had the rash. I was still itching all over. But from that moment on, from the moment that I made that promise, I did not scratch because I was not going to have to ask to go to the infirmary. No way. And so within, I think a week and a half or 2 weeks, the rash was completely gone. Completely gone. So I think it was psychosomatic, and I also think that my forcing myself to stop scratching helped a lot. Anyway, 6 weeks at boot camp, and I started a new life.
And it was good for you in other ways.
It was good. It was good for me in a lot of ways. Yeah, that's a whole other story. A whole other story. But I get VA health care now, which is a great blessing, great benefit. I honestly think that every citizen of the United States should have health care. And I have this idea that everybody should have the opportunity to give some kind of service to the country, whether it be military or non-military. It could be city year, it could be Peace Corps, but you give service for 2 years, I'm imagining. I haven't worked out the numbers, but you give service for 2 years, and then for the rest of your life, free health care.
Wow.
I think that would solve the health care process.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So you give service to your country gives back to you.
You work for it, yes.
Yeah, you work for it and then free health care for the rest of your life.
So beautiful.
So,
I think you should.
if you like this idea,
yes, I love it.
yeah, call it into your congressman.
That would change things. It's very different than just health care for everyone. You work for it.
Yeah, well, it's giving,
Yes.
giving and then receiving.
And maybe if you do more than 2 years, you can get some free college education.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and the more you give, the more you get back.
Yeah.
Something like that.
4 years, you get a 4-year college and health care for life.
All right. This is where you heard it first, on God Talk. So on that theme, I come across this poem. This is one of the first poems that I ever learned when I started studying poetry. This is by E.E. Cummings, who the first time I ever came across E.E. Cummings, I thought not only was his language strange and his punctuation strange, it didn't make any sense to me, but the man himself, he looked like this stern, bald guy, this stern, angry, bald guy in the pictures, the photographs that I saw of him. But I actually learned ultimately through his poetry and through what I had heard about him that he was quite a gentle soul. He was shaving his head long before it became popular.
Happily married, Emily.
Really?
I lived around here.
Yeah, he lived Harvard Square, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, this poem is about a war protester.
Oh my, I know it.
You know this poem?
But it's great to hear it again.
I sing of Olaf,
Yeah.
glad and big. I sing of Olaf, glad and big, whose warmest heart recoiled at war, a conscientious objector. His well-beloved colonel, trig West Pointer most succinctly bred, took erring Olaf soon in hand. But though an host of overjoyed non-coms, first knocking on the head of him, Do through icy waters roll that helplessness with others, that helplessness which others stoke with brushes, recently employed ascent his muddy toilet bowl, while kindred intellects evoke allegiance per blunt instruments. Olaf, being to all intents a corpse, and wanting any rag upon which God unto him gave, responds, without getting annoyed, I will not kiss your effing flag. Straightway, the silver bird looked grave, departing hurriedly to shave. But though all kinds of officers, a yearning nation's blue-eyed pride, their passive prey did kick and curse until for wear their clarion voices and boots were much the worse, and egged the first-class privates on his rectum, wickedly to tease by means of skillfully applied bayonets, roasted, hot with heat. Olaf, upon what were once knees, does almost ceaselessly repeat, there is some shit I will not eat. Our president, being of which assertions duly notified, threw the yellow son of a bitch into a dungeon, where he died. Christ, of mercy infinite, I pray to see, and Olaf too, preponderatingly because, unless statistics lie, he was more brave than me, more blonde than you. You know, I was noticing, as I was reading this, it's probably hard to hear the first time, hard to make sense of the first time, because E.E. Cummings makes so much play with language, with punctuation, with parentheses.
Shall we read it again?
No.
Okay.
I propose carrying on the theme of war.
What did you make of that ending? More blonde?
More brave than me, that was easy.
Yeah, the other
More
one was
brave
fine.
than me, more blonde than you. Well, golden, perhaps,
I guess.
or
Because that wasn't our ideal. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
blonde hair, blue eye. That was the ideal. That was certainly the ideal in Nazi Germany.
Right, but not.
And that, you know, there's a strain of that in American culture.
Yeah.
We're becoming much more multicultural now. But at one time, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, that was like the epitome.
Oh my.
And if you weren't blonde and blue-eyed, you had a strike against you already.
Well, we both have blue-gray eyes. We have similar color, I think.
I see gray more in yours, but the light, it depends a lot on the light.
Yes.
Come in a little closer so you can be part of the, you can be in the frame, I
Oh,
think.
I wasn't. Oh, I wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, you were barely.
No.
So, continuing on this theme, oh my God! With only 3 minutes to go. Less than that.
Yes.
The Fury of Aerial Bombardment by Richard Eberhardt. What you need to know, you know what? I'm just going to read it and explain it later if there's time. You would think the fury of aerial bombardment would rouse God to relent. The infinite spaces are still silent. He looks on shock-pride faces. History even does not know what is meant. You would feel that after so many centuries, God would give man to repent. Yet, he can kill as Cain could, but with multitudinous will. No farther advance than in his ancient furies. Was man made stupid to see his own stupidity? Is God by definition indifferent, beyond us all? Is the eternal truth man's fighting soul, wherein the beast ravens with its own avidity? Of Van Wettering I speak, Airman Van Wettering. Of Van Wettering I speak, and Airman Averill, names on a list whose faces I do not recall. But they are gone to early death, who late in school distinguished the belt-feed lever from the belt-holding pawl. I need to explain that last line. Richard Eberhart taught gunnery in airplanes during World War II. And the tail gunner or the belly gunner were often shot out unless they learned very quickly how to use the guns. And what he talks about in the very last line, the belt feed lever from the belt holding pawl, are parts of the guns. And if you didn't know how to operate them, you were kind of a goner. And so what I love about this poem is about how it begins in a very abstract and philosophical way, to talk about God, to talk about morality, but it ends with this very specific incident of these two airmen who died because they didn't know how to shoot a gun from a B-17. That's our show.